Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's episode, where we'll be sharing some chilling Thanksgiving horror stories. These stories happen during a time when families are meant to come together and be thankful, but instead, they are filled with fear and strange events. But before starting the video, please consider giving us a like. Also, if you have any terrifying or unnerving experiences of your own, feel free to reach out and share your story with us. Who knows, it might even be featured in one of our future episodes. This was an unusual experience, and it felt really scary at the time. But when I tell people about it, they usually don't think it was anything to worry about. So this happened last Thanksgiving, when I was driving home from college with my friend. We were both around 21-year-old females. My family lives in a very remote area of Arkansas, far from any big towns or cities. So to get there, we had to drive for about an hour through twisting, narrow roads in the mountains. There are lots of sharp turns where you can't see what's ahead, and the whole road runs along steep drop-offs with no guardrails. I'm usually pretty good at driving through the mountains, but since we were in my friend's car, I was going slower than usual, just a bit over the speed limit. Almost as soon as we started the toughest part of the drive, another car began following us very closely. This was making me feel tense, so as soon as I found a safe place to pull over, I took it. I turned into a small, empty church parking lot. My friend offered to drive the rest of the way, but I decided to keep driving. And she didn't know this road at all, so I felt it was safer if I drove. We got back on the road, but a few minutes later, I had to hit the brakes hard, because a car was stopped right in the middle of the road, blocking our way. The car wasn't pulled over to the side at all, it was just sitting still in the middle of the road. My friend said maybe they broke down and couldn't call a tow truck because there's no phone service out here. I got a bad feeling right away and locked our doors. I told my friend to stay in the car no matter what. She started to look worried and mentioned that she thought it was the same car that was following us earlier. The car was stopped just before a sharp turn, so I couldn't pass it safely. My friend started panicking and telling me to go around it, but I was worried about getting hit by a big truck or even sliding off the mountain. I honked the horn, but nothing happened. We couldn't call for help because there was no cell service. We just sat there, waiting, unsure of what to do. My friend was crying and really scared, but I was too nervous to try to pass the car. I honked a few times, hoping he'd move, but instead, a man got out of the car. He slowly walked to the back of his car, leaned against it, and just stared directly at us. My friend's panic was getting worse, and I felt completely frozen. The man didn't look like he was checking his car or trying to fix anything. He was just standing there, watching us, which made everything feel even creepier. So I told my friend not to look at him, trying to keep her calm. My heart was pounding, and I was ready to press the gas pedal if he made any sudden moves. We were trapped, with nowhere to go, so I silently hoped another car would show up soon to break the tension. This went on for what felt like forever, though it was probably about 15 minutes. The man just leaned against his car, calmly watching us the whole time. Then finally, I saw headlights from another car in the rearview mirror. As soon as the lights appeared, the man quickly ran back to his car, got in, and drove off at a dangerously high speed. It was clear there was nothing wrong with his car. We didn't see anything else for a while, but later we passed the same car parked by the road. it pulled back onto the highway and started following us again. I tried speeding up to lose him, but he kept tailing us. By now, we had cell service. I called home and told my brothers everything that had been happening, asking them to wait on the porch for us just in case. The car stayed behind us the entire way, following us down the long, narrow driveway that leads to my house. When we finally reached home, I was relieved to see my two brothers standing on the porch, looking serious. They were holding their baseball bat, ready to protect us if needed. I pulled into the driveway, and the car just went to the end, turned around, and sped off back the way it came. We tried to see the license plates, but we couldn't read them. My friend and I were really scared, but when I told other friends the whole story, they didn't think it was a big deal. About 6-7 years ago, I played soccer for a year at my community college right after high school. I met a guy there who worked in the athletics department, helping with sports events and equipment. He was also a student, so we sometimes ran into each other around campus. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I had a 1-hour break between classes, so I'd often hang around the athletics building or the soccer field. Then one afternoon, this guy saw me in the library and asked what I was doing there. I told him I had an hour-long break between classes. After that, he started coming regularly to hang out with me. I didn't mind because he seemed like a regular guy. He didn't have any reason to be there. He just wanted to spend time with me. A few times he even brought small gifts, like chocolate and other treats. He was being very nice. Maybe a bit too nice for someone I didn't know well. I didn't think about any warning signs back then. I think he knew that buying me gifts would be a bit much, but he still found a way to do it without making it obvious. Our soccer season ended just before Thanksgiving. The only teams that kept playing after our season ended were the ones going to the playoffs. After Thanksgiving, we had our final exams. During that short time between the end of the soccer season and Thanksgiving, he asked me about my classes for the next semester. Now, to be honest, I wasn't very organized with signing up for classes, so I didn't really know. Plus, the counselors weren't much help either. I didn't tell him all that, but I did mention that I didn't want another hour gap like this one, because it wasted a lot of time. I don't think he was happy to hear that. He also asked if I would play another season, and I told him no. I think my mistake was saying too much without holding back. I used to do that a lot back then, talking without thinking about how it might make others feel. This happened on the last Thursday before Thanksgiving, so there would be no more hour gaps to hang out. We had Thanksgiving break, took our finals, and then had winter break. Everything seemed fine. But winter break was when the real problems began. In the mornings, this guy actually started showing up outside my house, sitting in his car. The first time I couldn't believe it was really him. The second time, I checked, and it was him. When my parents were at work, this guy started showing up in the afternoons too, just sitting in his car outside my house. It was getting really uncomfortable. I called the cops a few times to report him. They would go talk to him, but he just told them he wasn't going to speak with them, and that was all. The cops seemed like they wanted to help, but they couldn't really do anything because he was being careful not to break the law. Like he didn't trespass on my property. He didn't make any threats, and he didn't show any weapons. It felt like there was nothing more they could do. So I just stopped expecting any real help from them. Now, after many years, I still don't know what he's doing, but I guess he just gave up. Or maybe his obsession got old, and he found other things to focus on. At least I hope that's what happened. my 30s, taking care of my elderly parents, so I'm staying in a downstairs room in my childhood home right now. The window faces the main street, and my bed faces toward it, so I often leave the window open at night because I need it cool to sleep. I haven't worried much about it, since there's a cabinet with an aquarium in front of the window. It doesn't block the view of the window, and I can reach to open and close it, but it would make it hard for someone to climb in. My dog, Sable, always sleeps in the room with me. She's medium size and has a light brown coat that makes her look friendly, not scary. Even though she seems harmless, she's actually a great guard dog. Sable is always alert to sounds, even the quiet ones, and if she senses anything unusual, she stands her ground, barking and growling to protect me. Knowing she's there and watching out helps me feel safe, so I haven't really worried about leaving the window open at night. But after what happened, I won't be able to leave the window open again. It started around 3:30 or 4 a.m. I was awake. Since I care for my parents, my sleep often gets interrupted, so I'm up at odd hours. I was reading a book when I heard Sable let out a deep, low growl. Then she jumped off the bed and began pacing, looking up at the window. She even jumped onto the cabinet by the window and started barking. Then I walked over to the window and carefully peeked out from the side of the curtains, looking for anything unusual. But I didn't see anything outside. So I pulled the curtains back together and made sure to pull the right curtain over first. Then I drew the left curtain all the way across, covering the right one too. I tucked the edges down tightly so the wind wouldn't move them and the window would be completely covered. I wasn't too worried at first. It's a quiet street, and we don't often hear much noise. There are foxes nearby that we sometimes hear at night, and sometimes someone walking by or the neighbor's gate opening will make Sable growl or bark. She's used to these sounds, so I didn't think much of it. But this time was different. Normally she'll growl softly and stay on the bed, maybe look around, but she won't do much more. I thought that even if someone was looking at the open window to possibly break in, they would have seen that the room had both a person and a dog, and would go find an easier target. But mostly I figured it was just a random noise she heard outside. I was wrong. About half an hour later, after I had relaxed and thought I might fall asleep, I heard her growl again. It was a really deep, serious growl, and I listened carefully, thinking it might be foxes or something. But then I heard what sounded like deep, creepy breathing noises. It was like the kind of heavy breathing a creepy person makes when stalking someone in a movie. I sat up, looked at the window, and my heart stopped. The curtain had been pulled back, and the bottom was lifted, like someone was peeking under it. I moved from the bed to the side of the window so I could see past the curtain. I saw the figure of a man move away from the window, going to the right, towards the front door and the exit of the garden. It was too dark to see his face or clothes, but I could tell it was a dark male figure. Shaking, I thought that since I knew he had moved away and wasn't at or under the window anymore, I reached up and pulled it shut. Then I grabbed my phone and called emergency services. One thing that really creeps me out now is that it would have taken a few seconds for me to move from the bed to the side of the window, and that was after I had shouted, so he knew he had been seen. But he must have stayed there, even knowing I had seen him until I moved the curtain and could see out. Then he moved away. The heavy breathing seemed planned. It was so loud, like someone trying to scare me. While I was on the phone with the police, I walked around the ground floor of the house, turning on lights, and checking to make sure everything was still secure. It was. 2 patrol officers arrived just before 5 a.m. and took my report. They suggested asking the neighbors if they had camera footage and to let them know about a possible prowler in the area tomorrow. I couldn't be 100% sure it was a man, but the breathing and the figure made me think it was. The outline of his head looked smooth, so he was either bald or wearing a tight cap, and his height seemed average. I never thought something like this would happen. I don't have any enemies, no recent exes, and no one I know who holds any grudges. Since I'm taking care of my parents full time, I'm not out socializing or making enemies. I'm a logical person and don't believe in ghosts. Even though I enjoy a good horror film, they don't scare me much anymore because I'm too old and cynical. I have to think it was someone trying to break into a house, or, and this one bothers me the most, maybe it was someone who just wanted to scare me. But why? Who would do that? New fears keep popping into my mind. For example, most nights, I'm up late or in the early hours, and I let the dog out into the back garden for a quick pee. And then I suddenly realize how easy it would be for someone to attack and get inside then. There's a path around the side of the house that goes from the front to the back garden, with only a small side gate. The gate is meant to keep the dog in, not to keep others out. It would be easy for someone to use that path and hide at the back of the house, out of sight. They were bold enough to come back a second time, even knowing a person and a dog were in the room. Maybe they were hoping I would have fallen asleep by then? It seemed like they were trying to scare me on purpose when they came back the second time. They kept making that deep breathing noise and stayed by the window even after I shouted. In the few seconds it took me to shout and get to the window to look outside, they could have moved and been out of sight, but they stayed there until I could see them, and only then did they move away. The day before Thanksgiving, my brother and I were driving from Los Angeles to the Bay Area to spend the holiday with our family. As we got close to our destination that night, the car was running low on gas, so we stopped at a gas station to fill up. My brother said he needed to use the restroom, so he headed inside, leaving me alone to fill the tank. As I was finishing up at the pump, I noticed a man walking over from the shadows near the gas station building. He looked scruffy and wore old, worn-out clothes. He gave me a nod and said hello, then asked if I wanted to buy a PlayStation 4. He spoke fast and kept looking around, as if he was nervous or watching for someone. I was a bit uneasy about him approaching me so suddenly, especially late at night at an empty gas station. I softly told him no, trying to keep things polite, but I also knew something felt off. It seemed likely the PlayStation was stolen, because normally people don't try to sell pricey electronics to random strangers at gas stations in the middle of the night. But when I said no, he started pushing even harder, and by this point, I was getting irritated. I don't like strangers coming up to me unless they're people I know, so I was on high alert right away. I live in a somewhat rough neighborhood in LA, where it's common for people on the street to try selling things like laptops, phones, and jewelry. The items usually look suspicious, and I doubt they were obtained legally. This happens often, and I've learned to be cautious, but it still bothers me. So I told the guy to leave directly on his face because he wasn't getting the hint that I wasn't interested. He actually acted like he'd been polite by just saying hi, before trying to sell me a probably stolen PlayStation 4. It was almost like he thought that made everything okay. I really didn't understand how much respect he thought he'd get while trying to sell questionable goods to random people. He got really angry at me and started shouting threats. Even though I was a bit bigger than him, I felt afraid. He was wearing a loose, oversized t-shirt, and I couldn't tell if he had a weapon hidden under it. My heart started racing as I looked around, hoping someone else would be nearby. Fortunately, the guy didn't follow through on his threats. He just turned around and walked away without trying to hurt me. I stood there for a moment, still feeling uneasy, watching as he got into his white pickup truck. His female companion was already in the passenger seat, and they both glanced at me with smug looks on their faces, smirking as they drove off. Once my brother came back from the restroom, I was just eager to leave and get back on the road, so I didn't think about it much. But now as I look back on it, I realize things could have taken a bad turn pretty quickly. If the guy had reacted differently, it could have turned into something much worse. I didn't even realize how tense the situation was until we were safely back in the car. It's crazy how quickly things can change when you're in the wrong place at the wrong time.